After a long period of hard work, I finally decided to take a vacation. My job as a graphic designer kept me incredibly busy, so I rarely had time for myself. I chose a small, peaceful village, far away from the city, for a retreat. I rented a house on Airbnb, hoping to enjoy the tranquility and stunning countryside. The village was charming, with cobblestone streets, old cottages, and exceptionally friendly locals. The Airbnb was a cozy little house on the edge of the village, surrounded by trees and a quaint garden. It seemed like the perfect spot for a serene getaway. When I arrived, I realized that the house key was not in the place I had been told it would be. I searched my bag thoroughly, thinking I might have misplaced it, but I couldn't find it anywhere. I called the host, a man named Mr. Green, who told me there was a spare key hidden under the doormat. I found it and let myself in. The house was warm and inviting, with wooden floors, a stone fireplace, and vintage-style furniture. It felt cozy and familiar. I unpacked my bags and prepared myself for a week of relaxation, with no worries about work. On the first night, as darkness fell, I got ready for bed. The village was so quiet, it felt as if time had stopped. Just as I was drifting off, I heard a faint sound. It was like someone trying to open the front door. My heart pounded as I listened more closely. The sound continued for a few minutes and then stopped. I cautiously got out of bed and crept to the door. But when I opened it, no one was there. I double-checked the lock to make sure it was secure, then went back to bed, convincing myself it was just my imagination. The rest of the night was uneventful, but I couldn't sleep deeply. The next morning, I stepped outside to get some fresh air and noticed the spare key was gone. Panic surged through me as I checked the area around the door. There was no sign of the key. I called Mr. Green again, but he didn't answer. I decided to explore the village to take my mind off the strange occurrence. The day passed peacefully. I visited the local bakery, strolled along the riverbank, and chatted with a few villagers. Everyone was warm and welcoming. By the time I returned to the Airbnb, I felt much more at ease. That night, while I was reading by the fireplace, I noticed something odd. A crumpled piece of paper had appeared on the coffee table, and I was certain it hadn't been there before. I picked it up and read the message. "I am watching you." My hands trembled, and I glanced around the room, feeling a chill creep over me. I searched the house, but nothing seemed out of place. I tried to dismiss it as a prank, but an uneasy feeling lingered. I locked all the doors and windows, hoping to keep whatever it was outside. That night was long and filled with strange noises. I heard faint whispers, footsteps, and occasionally the sound of someone fiddling with the door. Each time I checked, but found nothing. By morning, my nerves were frayed. When I woke up, I found another note on the kitchen counter. "You can't hide." My anxiety spiked as I walked around the house. I discovered strange symbols drawn in red ink on the walls and furniture. They looked like ritual markings, and I felt sick to my stomach. I tried calling Mr. Green again, but still no response. I thought about leaving, but my car wouldn't start and my phone had no signal. I felt trapped and isolated. As the day wore on, my fear grew. That night, the sounds returned, louder and more frequent. I could hear footsteps circling the house, followed by faint, eerie laughter. I hid in my room, clutching a kitchen knife, trying to stay alert. It felt like I was losing my mind. Just before dawn, I heard noises coming from the attic. I had forgotten that the house even had an attic. With trembling hands, I climbed the narrow stairs and pushed open the creaky door. The attic was dark, filled with old furniture and dusty boxes. In the corner, I noticed a small, flickering light. I moved closer and saw a laptop with the screen on, displaying a live video feed from hidden cameras around the house. I saw myself on the screen, sitting in the attic, and a shadowy figure standing right behind me. I spun around, but there was no one there. A wave of dread washed over me as I realized Mr. Green had been watching me all along. The footage showed him sneaking into the house, leaving the notes, and drawing the strange symbols. I grabbed the laptop and rushed down from the attic. I locked myself in the bedroom and called the police. This time, I managed to get a signal. I explained everything to the dispatcher, my voice shaking with fear. The police arrived within an hour. They searched the house and found more hidden cameras and disturbing footage showing Mr. Green planning something sinister. They arrested him and I was taken to a safe place. I never went back to that village. The memory of that vacation still haunts me. It left a scar on my mind, reminding me that sometimes the most beautiful places hide the darkest secrets. Kevin and I had been together for 5 years. Our relationship was strong, built on trust and love. We both had a passion for nature, especially the mountains, and we often dreamed of spending a quiet weekend in a cabin hidden away in the woods. So when Kevin found a cabin for rent in the mountains, we were excited. It seemed like the perfect romantic getaway, far from the noise and hustle of the city. The drive up the mountain was beautiful. The winding roads were lined with tall trees, their dense leaves forming a natural canopy overhead. The air was fresh and cool, a refreshing change from the polluted city air. As the cabin came into view, we were captivated by its rustic charm, nestled among the trees like something out of a fairy tale. It was exactly as we had imagined, a cozy living room with a fireplace, a small but well-equipped kitchen, and a comfortable bedroom. What caught our attention the most, however, was the old attic. The owner had warned us not to go into the attic, saying it was unsafe and filled with old, forgotten items. But Kevin and I were always curious. We couldn't resist the temptation of exploring every corner of our temporary home. After unpacking and settling in, we decided to check out the attic. The entrance was a small, creaky door at the end of a narrow hallway. When we opened it, a musty smell hit us. The attic was dimly lit, with only a small window letting in faint light. Dust particles floated in the air, giving the space an eerie atmosphere. Inside, we saw old furniture covered with white sheets. There were intricately carved wooden chairs, a rocking chair that creaked with the slightest touch, and a large wardrobe that seemed to stand guard over the room. But the most intriguing item was an antique mirror. It was large, with a golden frame, ornately decorated but faded with age. The mirror's surface was hazy, making it difficult to clearly see our reflections. That night, as we settled down to sleep, the strange feeling that the attic had given us lingered. The silence of the mountains felt suffocating, only broken by the occasional rustling of leaves outside. Just as we were about to fall asleep, we heard a strange noise coming from the attic. It sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate. Kevin and I exchanged worried glances. We decided to go upstairs and check, hoping that it was just our imagination playing tricks on us. We grabbed a flashlight and headed to the attic. But when we opened the door, the room was completely empty. The furniture was undisturbed, and the mirror stood silently, reflecting the flashlight's beam. We went back to bed, trying to convince ourselves that nothing was wrong. But the noises continued, and each time we checked, we found nothing. The next morning, we woke up exhausted. Our sleep had been haunted by vivid nightmares. In my dreams, my reflection in the mirror was distorted, not quite right. I saw myself with empty eyes and a twisted smile. Kevin had similar dreams, and we both felt an increasing sense of unease. Determined to uncover the truth, we started researching the history of the cabin. We discovered that it had once belonged to a family who had mysteriously disappeared. Locals whispered about dark secrets and strange occurrences, but no one knew the full story. The more we learned, the more certain we became that the mirror might hold the key to what was happening. That night, as we sat in the living room, the footsteps echoed again. This time, they were clearer, reverberating throughout the cabin. We decided to face whatever was in the attic. With a flashlight and newfound determination, we climbed the stairs once more. As we stepped into the attic, we noticed something we hadn't seen before. The mirror was emitting a faint glow. We approached it cautiously. Standing before the mirror, our reflections seemed to shift. We saw the family who had once lived there, a mother, a father, and 2 children. They looked sad and afraid. Then their reflections began to move independently of us. They reached out, pressing their hands against the glass as if they were trying to escape. Suddenly, the room grew icy cold, and the air around us seemed to thicken. We heard whispers, soft, sorrowful sounds, filling the room. The mirror's surface rippled like water, and we felt an intense pull, as if it was trying to draw us in. We tried to step back, but it felt like our feet were rooted to the floor. The whispers grew louder, and we watched the faces of the family twist in anguish. They were trapped, and the mirror was their prison. Desperate to help, we reached out and touched the glass. Instantly, a shock ran through us, and the room spun. When we came to, we were lying on the attic floor. The mirror was shattered, its fragments scattered around us. The room was silent, and the oppressive feeling had vanished. We stumbled downstairs, our minds spinning from what we had just experienced. We quickly packed our things and left the cabin, not daring to look back. As we drove away, it felt as if we had narrowly escaped a disaster beyond explanation. The mirror was gone, but the memory of that terrifying night stayed with us. We never spoke of it again, but the echoing footsteps and the sorrowful faces in the mirror remain etched in our minds. A reminder that dark secrets linger in certain places, waiting for the right moment to be discovered. I had just moved into my new apartment a few weeks ago. It was a high-rise, modern building in the city, with a sleek design and a stunning view of the skyline. My name is Mark, and I've been living alone since graduating from college. This was my first time having a place of my own, and I was excited to enjoy this freedom. After a long workday, I returned to the apartment feeling completely worn out. I planned to relax, watch a movie, and unwind. My apartment was on the 15th floor, and the nighttime cityscape, with its bright lights, always gave me a sense of calm. I put my things away, changed into something comfortable, and settled on the couch with a bowl of popcorn. As soon as I started the movie, I heard a faint knocking sound. At first, I thought it was just a sound from the movie, but the knocking continued even when the movie was silent. I paused it and listened carefully. The knocking was coming from the front door. I felt a bit uneasy, but told myself it was probably a neighbor or someone who had the wrong door. I walked over to the door and looked through the peephole. There was no one there. I shrugged, thinking it might have been a prank or that someone had already left. I went back to the couch and resumed the movie. But a few minutes later, the knocking started again, louder and more insistent this time. A cold chill ran down my spine. I got up and went to the door again, looking through the peephole. Still no one there. I stood there for a moment, my mind racing with thoughts. Could it be a prank, or was someone trying to scare me? I decided to ignore it and went back to the couch. But the knocking didn't stop. Instead, it seemed to move around the apartment. First, it was at the front door, then it came from the walls, then the ceiling. It was as if someone was moving around the apartment, knocking on different surfaces. My heart pounded. I knew I had to find out what was causing these strange sounds. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and decided to search the entire apartment. I started with the bedroom, shining the flashlight into every corner and closet. Nothing unusual. I moved to the bathroom, checking behind the shower curtain and under the sink. Still nothing. As I stood in the hallway, I suddenly remembered something the landlord had mentioned during the tour. There was an old storage room in the basement that connected to the apartment through a forgotten maintenance tunnel. He said it was always locked and rarely used, but remembering it made me uneasy. I decided to check the basement. If someone was getting into the apartment, it had to be through that tunnel. I grabbed my keys and got into the elevator. The ride down to the basement seemed endless. The air grew colder and heavier as the elevator descended. When the doors opened, I stepped out into the dimly lit basement. The storage room was at the end of a long, narrow hallway. I walked slowly, the flashlight's beam cutting through the darkness. The walls were covered in old pipes and cobwebs, and the air smelled damp and stale. Finally, I reached the storage room door. It was a heavy wooden door with a rusty lock. I tried the handle, and to my surprise, it turned. The door creaked open, revealing a dark space filled with old furniture and dusty boxes. I stepped inside, my flashlight sweeping across the room. In the far corner, I saw the entrance to the maintenance tunnel. It was a narrow, dark passage that seemed to stretch on forever. I knew I needed to make sure it was securely locked. I moved slowly toward the tunnel, my footsteps echoing in the quiet room. When I reached the entrance, I saw that the tunnel door was slightly ajar. My heart pounded as I pushed it open and shone the flashlight inside. The tunnel was empty, but a cold draft blew from within. I stepped inside, the flashlight barely illuminating the walls. The deeper I went, the colder it got. I could hear my breathing, heavy and fast in the confined space. After what felt like an eternity, I reached the end of the tunnel. There was another door, just like the one in the basement. I pushed it open and found myself in a small room filled with old maintenance equipment. I looked around, searching for any signs of an intruder. Suddenly, the knocking came again, this time right behind me. I spun around, the flashlight shaking in my hand, but there was no one. I backed out of the room and shut the door, locking it securely. I hurried back through the tunnel, my nerves fraying. When I finally emerged back in the basement, I locked the storage room door and rushed to the elevator. Back in the apartment, the knocking had stopped entirely. The silence was almost more unnerving than the noises had been. I double-checked all the locks and windows, making sure everything was secure. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, but I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination. I sat down on the couch, trying to calm my racing heart. The city lights outside suddenly seemed distant and cold. I knew I wouldn't be able to relax or sleep after what had happened. The thought that someone could access my apartment through the tunnel terrified me. I stayed up all night, listening for any sound. When the first light of dawn crept through the windows, I finally felt a sense of relief. Daylight brought a sense of safety, but I knew I needed to talk to the landlord about securing the storage room and the maintenance tunnel. This experience left me shaken, but it also taught me to be more careful. Living alone had its perks, but it also meant I had to be responsible for my own safety. The city was full of mysteries and dangers, and I had just faced one of them. I only hoped I'd never have to go through something like that again. Before we dive into the next story, if you're here for the first time, let me know where you're tuning in from. Be sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any of the upcoming scary stories. We appreciate your support. Feel free to share these stories with your friends and family. Thank you. A few years ago, my friends and I decided to go camping in a remote forest. We were excited to reconnect and enjoy nature. It was early summer, and the weather was perfect for a weekend away from the city. Our group consisted of me, Jake, Lisa, and Tom. We had been friends since high school, and this trip was our chance to catch up after busy months of work and life. We packed our gear and drove out to the forest on a Friday afternoon. The drive was long, but the scenery was beautiful. As we ventured deeper into the woods, the trees grew taller, and sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting a soft, green glow. Finally, we arrived at our campsite, a small clearing next to a quiet stream. We set up our tents and built a campfire. The air was filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. On the first night, we gathered around the campfire, sharing stories and roasting marshmallows. The flames flickered, casting eerie shadows among the trees. We laughed and reminisced about the past. Everything felt perfect, almost magical. After a while, we decided to go to sleep, exhausted after a long day and eager to explore the forest the next morning. The next day, I woke up early. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a golden light over the campsite. I noticed that Jake's tent was empty. At first, I thought he might have gone for a walk or to the stream for some water. But as time passed and he didn't return, we began to worry. Where could Jake be? Lisa asked, her voice full of concern. Tom suggested we split up to search for him. We agreed and headed in different directions, calling his name. I walked toward the stream where we often spent time. The forest was quiet, with only the sounds of birds and rustling leaves. As I got closer to the stream, I saw something strange. Jake's backpack was lying on the ground, but he was nowhere to be found. I called out to him again, but there was no response. I picked up the backpack and returned to the campsite. Lisa and Tom were already there, looking anxious. "Did you find anything?" Tom asked. I held up the backpack. "I found this by the stream, but there's no sign of Jake." We decided to search the forest more thoroughly. We marked our campsite with bright ribbons and ventured deeper into the woods. As we moved, we began to sense something strange. The forest seemed alive. The trees felt like they were closing in around us, and the air grew thick and heavy. We stumbled upon another clearing, smaller than our campsite. In the center was a circle of stones, and within the circle, the ground was completely bare, as if nothing had ever grown there. It was unsettling, but we pressed on, calling out for Jake. By the time the sun began to set, we still hadn't found him. Tired and worried, we returned to our campsite. That night, strange things began to happen. Personal belongings went missing. Lisa's flashlight, Tom's jacket, and even some of our food disappeared. We heard strange noises, whispers in the wind, and footsteps coming from nowhere. As the night wore on, we caught glimpses of Jake in the darkness. He looked different, almost ghostly. He would appear for a moment and then vanish. We tried to follow him, but he always slipped away. The next morning, we were more determined than ever to solve the mystery. We remembered an old legend about the forest, stories about people disappearing without a trace. According to the legend, the forest was haunted by spirits that lured people in and kept them forever. We decided to investigate further. We searched for any clues that might explain the strange events. We found old carvings on the trees, symbols we didn't understand. There was also a hidden path that seemed to lead deeper into the forest, a path that felt ancient and forbidden. As we followed the path, the forest grew darker and colder. A sense of dread weighed heavily on us, but we continued. The path led us to a massive, ancient tree. Its roots twisted and coiled, and its branches looked like skeletal arms. In front of the tree was a small wooden cabin, half concealed by overgrown foliage. We approached cautiously. The door creaked open, and inside we found signs of recent activity: empty food cans, a makeshift bed, and more of those strange symbols etched into the walls. Suddenly, we heard a noise behind us. We turned and saw Jake standing there, but he wasn't the same. His eyes were vacant, and he moved stiffly, like a puppet on strings. "Jake, is that you?" Lisa asked, her voice shaking. He didn't respond. Instead, he started moving toward us, his movements awkward and unsettling. We backed away, fear gripping our hearts. It was then we realized the forest had taken him, and he was no longer our friend. We ran back to the campsite, panic setting in. We had to get out before the forest claimed us too. We gathered our things and began packing, but as we prepared to leave, we heard the whispers again, closer than ever. None of us dared to look back. We raced through the forest, following the ribbons we had tied to the trees. The forest seemed to resist us, branches snagging our clothes and roots tripping our steps. But we kept going. We could feel the presence of the forest closing in around us. Finally, we broke through the tree line and reached our car. We jumped in, and Tom started the engine. As we drove away, we saw Jake standing at the edge of the forest, staring at us with those empty eyes. We didn't stop until we were miles away, back in the safety of the city. We never spoke of that trip again. The forest had taken something from us, something we could never get back. We had gone there to reconnect and enjoy nature, but we returned with scars in our minds, haunted by the memory of what we had lost. In 2006, I spent a quiet evening alone at my family's farmhouse. My parents were away for the weekend, and I thought it was the perfect chance to unwind and enjoy some peace and quiet. The house was in a remote area, surrounded by vast fields and a dense forest. It was an old, creaky house that made noises every time the wind blew, but it was home to me. I arrived in the late afternoon, just as the sun was setting, and darkness began to creep over the fields. I parked the car and took a deep breath of the crisp country air. I brought my bags inside, locked the door behind me, and felt a wave of calm wash over me. I made a simple meal and sat at the kitchen table, gazing out at the darkness outside. The sky had turned a deep shade of purple, and soon it was pitch black. I switched on a few lights and settled down on the sofa in the living room with a book in my hands. As I started reading, I heard strange noises. At first, I thought it was just the house settling into the evening breeze. The wind was blowing hard outside, making the leaves rustle and the shutters creak, but then I heard a distinct sound, like footsteps crunching on the gravel outside. I stopped, my heart racing. I tried to convince myself it was just a wild animal or my imagination. But the feeling of unease wouldn't go away, and I couldn't focus on my book anymore. The footsteps continued, as if someone was circling the house, stopping and then starting again. I put down my book and listened intently. The sound seemed like someone walking just outside. I got up, moving quietly towards the window, and peeked out through the curtains. I couldn't see a thing in the enveloping darkness. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was nothing serious, and decided to check the back door to be safe. As I walked into the hallway, I suddenly noticed something unusual. There were muddy footprints on the floor, leading from the back door into the living room. My heart sank. Someone had been inside the house. I rushed to check the back door and found it was still locked. How did they get in? A chill ran down my spine. I tried to stay calm and think clearly. I suddenly remembered that our house was equipped with security cameras. I quickly headed to the study where the surveillance monitor was. My hands were trembling as I switched it on. The screen came to life, showing footage from various cameras around the house. At first, everything seemed normal, just empty fields and the dark, dense forest. But then, on one of the cameras, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was a masked figure standing at the edge of the forest, staring directly at the house. I swallowed hard, covering my mouth with my hand. The person stood still, motionless like a statue, eyes locked on the house. I switched to another camera, and now the figure was closer, slowly approaching the house. Panic welled up inside me. I grabbed my phone and tried to call for help, but there was no signal. This area was too isolated. I was alone. I couldn't just sit there and wait for the intruder to come in. I needed a plan. I went around, locking every door and window, making sure everything was secure. I found a heavy metal flashlight and gripped it tightly, feeling a little more secure. I returned to the living room and turned off all the lights, hoping that the darkness would protect me. I crouched behind the sofa, occasionally peeking out to see if I could spot the masked figure. The house was dead silent, except for the sound of my own ragged breathing. Time seemed to crawl, stretching each minute into eternity. I kept checking the surveillance monitor, watching the figure come closer and closer. Finally, the intruder was at the back door. I held my breath, praying that the door wouldn't open. To my horror, the doorknob slowly turned, and the door creaked open. I was sure I had locked it. How had they managed to open it? The figure stepped inside, moving silently from room to room. I could see them on the monitor, heading toward the living room. I knew I had to act quickly. I remembered there was an emergency exit in the basement. If I could get down there, I might be able to escape and find help from a neighbor. I moved stealthily, staying low. I opened the basement door and crept down, praying the hinges wouldn't squeak. The basement was cold and dark. I fumbled for the light switch, but decided not to turn it on. Darkness was my ally now. I felt my way along the walls, heading for the exit. Suddenly, I heard footsteps on the basement stairs. The intruder was following me. I moved faster, careful not to make a sound. I reached the exit door and tried the handle. It was locked from the outside. My heart sank. I was trapped. The footsteps grew louder. I needed to hide. I saw an old wardrobe in the corner and quickly slipped inside, closing the door behind me. I tried to steady my breathing, listening closely to the sounds around me. The basement door creaked open, and footsteps echoed in the room. The intruder was searching for me. I held my breath, hoping not to be discovered. Time dragged by, feeling endless. The footsteps came closer and stopped right in front of the wardrobe. Through the crack in the door, I could see a faint shadow. Just when I thought it was all over, a loud noise came from upstairs. The intruder froze, then quickly turned and rushed back up the stairs. I waited, listening as the footsteps faded away. I stayed hidden for what felt like hours, but was probably just a few minutes. When I was sure they had gone, I cautiously stepped out and made my way back upstairs. The house was still and silent again, but the sensation of being watched lingered. I checked my phone, and the signal was back. I immediately called the police, explaining everything. They arrived soon after and searched the house and surrounding area, but the intruder was long gone. They told me I was fortunate to be unharmed. They suggested I not stay in the house that night, and I agreed. I gathered my things and left the farmhouse without looking back. That night changed my life forever. I never felt safe in the farmhouse again. The image of the masked figure still haunts my dreams. I learned that you always have to stay aware of your surroundings and trust your instincts. It was a lesson I would never forget. I've been working at this gas station for 3 years. It's a small station with just 2 people, alternating shifts. Mike, my coworker, is like an older brother. He always looks out for me, and we often share stories to pass the time. The gas station is located on a desolate road, surrounded by dark, dense woods. Most nights are quiet, with only a few customers stopping by to refuel or grab a snack. One night, Mike called in sick, so I had to work alone. That night was dark and cold, with the wind howling through the trees. The gas station was eerily silent, except for the constant buzzing of the fluorescent lights. I felt uneasy being alone. The darkness outside seemed heavier than usual, and the shadows of the trees swayed like eerie figures. I tried to keep myself busy by rearranging the shelves and cleaning the counter. The clock seemed to be moving slower than usual. Around midnight, a car pulled up to the pump. The sound of tires crunching on the gravel startled me. I looked out the window and saw an old beat-up sedan. The driver didn't get out. He just sat there staring at the gas station. I took a deep breath and stepped outside. The cold air stunned my skin. "Do you need any help?" I called out loudly, trying to sound confident. The man in the car slowly turned his head to look at me. His face was pale and gaunt, with dark circles under his eyes. He nodded slowly, but didn't say a word. I walked over to the pump and noticed that he hadn't even picked up the nozzle. He was just sitting there, staring at me unblinkingly. "Do you want to fill up?" I asked again. He nodded again, then slowly opened his car door. As he got out, I noticed he was wearing a dirty coat, and his clothes looked old and worn. He moved sluggishly, as if in a daze. He handed me a crumpled bill and mumbled something I couldn't quite make out. I took the money and started pumping gas. The man stood beside his car, watching me the entire time, his gaze never wavering. His stare made me more and more uncomfortable. When the tank was full, he didn't move to remove the nozzle. I had to do it myself. "Have a good night," I said, trying to end the interaction quickly. He didn't respond, just silently got back into his car and drove away without another word. I went back inside and locked the door behind me. My heart was racing. I tried to calm down by focusing on my tasks, but the feeling of unease wouldn't go away. The wind outside seemed to grow stronger, and the darkness inside the station seemed to thicken. I couldn't shake the image of the man's lifeless eyes. Time dragged on slowly, and when I looked at the clock, it was already 3 a.m. I counted every minute, waiting for my shift to end. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out. The entire gas station was plunged into darkness. My heart skipped a beat. I reached under the counter for the flashlight and switched it on. The beam cut through the darkness, but the shadows seemed to creep closer. I checked the circuit breaker, but everything seemed fine. Perhaps the storm brewing outside had caused the power outage. I tried calling Mike, but there was no signal. I was alone, with only the flashlight to light my way. As I returned to the counter, I heard a noise outside. It sounded like footsteps on the gravel. I shone the flashlight towards the door, but saw nothing. The wind howled, making the sound even more unnerving. A chill ran down my spine. I couldn't see anyone, but I knew I wasn't alone. I decided to stay behind the counter, where I felt a little safer. Time seemed to slow down, every minute stretching into eternity. The footsteps echoed again, closer this time. My hands trembled as I held the flashlight. I heard a soft tapping on the glass door. Slowly, I turned the flashlight toward the entrance. There, with his face pressed against the glass, was the man from the car. His eyes were wide, and his mouth twisted into a sinister grin. My heart pounded in my chest. He didn't move, just stood there, staring at me. I slowly backed away, hoping he would leave, but he didn't. He started banging on the door, harder and harder. I felt trapped. There was no way out. The windows were locked, and I was too terrified to run outside. The banging grew louder, echoing through the empty gas station. My mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. Suddenly, the lights flickered back on. The man stopped banging and stared at me for a few more moments before turning away and disappearing into the darkness. I couldn't sleep that morning. As soon as my shift ended, I locked up the station and drove home, my hands still shaking. The next day, I told Mike about what happened, and he promised to look into it, but the man never returned. The image of his lifeless eyes and sinister grin still haunts me. Working late at the gas station has never been the same since. I've always been close to my family, especially my brother Sam. We grew up together, played together, and eventually ended up doing the same job. Sam is also a truck driver, just like me. We often share stories about our long hauls, the things we see on the road, and the strange people we meet. But there's one story I've never told him. It happened one dark night on a deserted highway, and it still haunts me to this day. Sam and I have a habit of calling each other every night, no matter how far apart we are. It's our way of staying connected, no matter where our jobs take us. That night, I had just finished my call with Sam. He was parked safely at a rest stop. I, however, was still on the road, with the seemingly endless highway stretching out in front of me. The sky was pitch black, with only my headlights cutting through the thick darkness. The highway was completely empty, just a long, lonely strip of asphalt with no sign of life. The sound of the engine was my only companion. The cabin was cool thanks to the air conditioning, but I could feel the chill from outside creeping in. The radio was softly playing a country song about lost love and broken dreams. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard. It was past midnight. As I kept driving, I noticed a shadow on the side of the road. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a deer or some other creature. But as I got closer, I realized it was a person. The figure stood still, just outside the range of my headlights. I slowed down, thinking they might need help. It's not uncommon to see hitchhikers or stranded drivers on these lonely roads. I pulled over to the side of the road and rolled down the window. "Do you need help?" I called out. But there was no response. The figure remained motionless, shrouded in darkness. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I tried to shake it off, assuming they were just scared or confused. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment and stepped out of the truck. The night air was cold and still, and the only sound was the crunch of gravel under my boots. I aimed the flashlight toward the figure, and that's when I saw him clearly. He was a man, dressed in ragged clothes, his face pale and gaunt. His eyes were wide and vacant, staring right at me. "Are you okay?" I asked again, but he didn't respond. He just stood there, completely still. A sense of dread crept over me. Something was definitely wrong. I decided to go back to my truck and call for help. But just as I turned around, I heard a rustling noise behind me. I spun around, the flashlight beam darting wildly. The man was gone. My heart pounded in my chest as I scanned the area with the flashlight. There was no sign of him. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. I quickly climbed back into the truck and locked the doors. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone to call Sam. "Hey, what's up?" Sam's cheerful voice greeted me. "Sam, I just saw something strange," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "There was a man on the side of the road, but now he's gone." "Maybe he just walked off," Sam suggested. "You know, some people get scared and run away." "Yeah, maybe," I agreed, but I didn't believe it. There was something unsettling about that man. I decided to keep driving and head to the nearest rest stop. I needed to get off the highway and clear my head. As I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every shadow seemed to move, and every little sound made me jump. The highway, once familiar and routine, now felt eerie and threatening. I kept glancing at my rearview mirror, half expecting to see the man again. After what felt like hours, I finally saw the lights of a rest stop up ahead. I pulled in and parked, grateful for the bright lights and the presence of other people. I decided to stay there for the night. I climbed into the sleeper cab, locked the doors securely, and pulled the curtains shut. I lay in the dark, trying to calm my racing heart. I listened to the familiar sounds of the rest stop. The distant hum of engines, occasional footsteps, and muffled conversations. Those sounds were a comfort, a reminder that I wasn't alone. Just as I began to relax, I heard a faint tapping on the window. My heart froze. I lay still, listening. The tapping continued, slow and deliberate. I reached for the flashlight and shone it toward the window. There was nothing there. I lay back down, still clutching the flashlight tightly. I didn't get much sleep that night, my mind racing with fear and confusion. The next morning, I called Sam again and told him the whole story. He listened quietly, then said, "Maybe it was just your imagination. Long hours on the road can do that to you." "Maybe," I replied, but I knew what I had seen was real. I could still remember the man's vacant eyes staring at me and the rustling sound as he disappeared. I never saw him again, but that night changed me forever. The highway, which had once symbolized freedom and adventure, now felt haunted and dangerous. Sam and I still share our stories, but this one I keep to myself. It's a reminder that no matter how familiar the road may seem, there's always something lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to step into the light. Working late at the office had become my routine. My boss, Mr. Hargrove, always appreciated my hard work. He often said I was the backbone of the company and trusted me with important responsibilities. My colleagues were friendly, but they had families and lives to return to after work. As for me, I found comfort in the quiet, empty office when there was no one else around. That evening, I was once again the last person left in the building. Our office was on the 10th floor of a high-rise in the middle of downtown. From the large windows, the city's bright lights were stunning, creating a beautiful yet lonely scene. I sat at my desk, the only sounds being the hum of the air conditioner and the tapping of my keyboard echoing through the silence. The dim light cast long shadows, making the office look slightly eerie. I had a lot of work to do, reports to finish and emails to send. The stack of files on my desk seemed endless. As the clock neared midnight, an odd sense of unease washed over me. The office, a place that had always felt familiar, suddenly seemed different. The silence felt heavier, almost pressing down on the space around me. Suddenly, I heard a small noise. It was a faint thud, but in the stillness of the night, it was very clear. My heart pounded. I looked around expecting to see something, but nothing was there. I reassured myself that it was just the building settling or the wind passing through. I continued working, but the feeling of anxiety lingered. A few minutes later, the noise came again, louder this time. It sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the hallway. My heart raced. Who could be here at this hour? Everyone had left long ago. I stood up and walked toward the door. The hallway was pitch dark, the motion sensor lights only activated with movement. I peeked through the door, but saw nothing. The lights remained off, confirming that no one was there. I let out a sigh of relief, though I still felt uneasy. I returned to my desk, but just then, I saw it, a shadow moving across the far end of the office. A chill ran down my spine. Someone was there. I quickly ducked behind my desk, my heart pounding. Again, I heard the footsteps, slow and steady, coming closer. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. Whispering my situation to the operator. They told me the police were on their way, but it would take a little while. Every minute felt like an eternity when you're hiding from an unknown intruder. I huddled behind my desk, trying not to make a sound. The footsteps grew louder, closer. I could see the shadow moving along the walls, approaching my hiding spot. I had to stay silent, had to stay hidden. The office, once a safe haven, now felt like a trap. The shadow stopped right in front of my desk. I could see a pair of old, dirty shoes just inches away. My hands were shaking, my heart racing. I prayed the intruder wouldn't notice me. Suddenly, there was a loud crash. The intruder had knocked over a chair, muttering angrily under his breath. He seemed frustrated and angry. He started rummaging through the office, opening drawers, searching for something. I stayed hidden, clutching my phone, waiting for the police. Finally, after what felt like forever, I heard the sound of sirens. The intruder heard them too. He began to panic, his movements growing frantic. He ran toward the door, but it was too late. The police were already inside the building. I remained in hiding until I heard the officer's commands telling the intruder to freeze. I slowly stood up, my legs trembling, and saw the police putting handcuffs on the man. He looked disheveled, his eyes wild. They led him away, and I finally felt a wave of relief. One of the officers approached me and asked if I was all right. I nodded, still in shock, and recounted what had happened. They informed me that the intruder was a wanted criminal who had been on the run for weeks. He had broken into the building, seeking a place to hide. The office was now a mess, but I was safe. The police assured me they would stay until everything was secure. I thanked them, feeling a mix of gratitude and lingering fear. The place that once gave me comfort had become a haunting memory. As I packed up my things to leave, I couldn't stop thinking about how close I had come to danger. The office, with its large windows and beautiful city view, no longer felt like a sanctuary. I knew I wouldn't be working late again after what had happened. My relationship with my job changed completely that night. The dedication and routine I once valued were replaced with a need for safety and caution. As I stepped out into the cool night, I took a deep breath, grateful to be alive, and determined never to let my guard down again.